Right, yeah, I thought I would talk all about Ukraine today, and that Nigel dared to voice a sort of dissenting view on the Russian-Ukrainian conflict.
They're not happy about it, are they?
No, right, yeah, the Uni Party, the Party of Davos, whatever you want to call it, do not like that.
No.
Yeah, Nigel isn't in line with their view. And I wonder if we can have, because he's touched on something a bit deeper, really, is whether we can have a conversation. By we, I mean the Western Hemisphere, really, or at least Britain. Yeah. Can we have an actual grown-up, reasonable, nuanced conversation about the thing? Because that is exactly what the Uni Party don't want you to have. They want you to have the very, very low-resolution view that they have.
Yeah.
That Zelensky is a modern-day Churchill, i.e. perfect. And Putin is the modern-day Hitler, i.e. the root of all evil.
I don't think there was ever a conversation.
Right now,
to be honest. Yeah, it was just you're supposed to go boo, you're supposed to go hooray.
So there's lots of different, I suppose you could call them power centres in the world. You know, the Central Committee in Beijing is one.
Yeah.
You know, the Kremlin is another. And America is one, whether it's the White House, or whether it's actually really the State Department in conjunction with the Pentagon. You know, the State Department, the bureaucrats there, and the chiefs over at the Pentagon have got a certain line, certain worldview. And it seems Britain has, for a long, long time, since the war, World War II, has sort of more or less, nearly always, just gone along with it. Not always, of course, there are examples. You know, we didn't see eye to eye on the Falklands, for example.
No.
Or they didn't help us out in the Suez and things. But usually we do whatever we're told. We're told what we're supposed to think on foreign policy, and we go along with it. And the line is that Zelensky is sort of God. So if we play this little clip, if anyone remembers this. Have I got control of the mouse? Stumpson, are you doing it?
I'm not doing anything.
Stumpson, you do it. So yeah, if you remember this, there's Pelosi and Kamala in full sycophant mode. This is awkward. Okay. Anyway, and then they give him an American flag in return, and you can stop that. We don't need to see any more of that.
It's not quite as bad as the Canadian Parliament, where they had an actual Nazi war criminal to applaud.
The enemy of my enemy is my friend, taken to truly absurd lengths.
Yeah, even if he literally served under Hitler.
How many times does the West or America do we have to go through this thing that my enemy's enemy is my friend, regardless of the blowback years later? You know, like the Mujahideen in Afghanistan, or being friends of Saddam during the Iran-Iraq war, being friends with Gaddafi when it suited us. I suppose it's realpolitik, isn't it? I mean, it's just, it is what it is. But how many times do we have to be sort of forced to back a certain party at one point, when it's clear to me, and this is kind of my take, that there are no goodies in the Russia-Ukraine thing. It's not that Zelensky and Ukraine are the goodies and Russia and Putin are the baddies. Now, a lot of people will immediately say, you're a pro-Putin apologist, you're an appeaser of the Kremlin. Well, no such thing. No such thing. I can be not in favour of sending endless money and men, and Ukrainian men, to their deaths, and not be on board with Putin.
If it helps, I don't find that the allegations of being pro-Putin have any teeth to them at all. I'm totally indifferent about Russia. If anything, I feel kind of sorry for it. Russian history is awful.
Right.
Like, it's just a cavalcade of terrible things. I mean, like, World War II for Russia was really bad. 26 million dead. That is shocking. You know, that's what was it, like an eighth of their entire population, a sixth of their entire population or something. That was unbelievable. And so it's just like, okay, it's just a land of suffering, and it has been for 1,000 years.
Yeah.
And the main issue that we seem to have is, and all the charges against Russia are just basically, you're insufficiently liberal. And it's like, well, duh. Like, why would they be liberal? Like, anyway, I've got no particular care about Russia. It just doesn't come up in my thoughts until they're like, you love Putin. It's like, no, I just hate what you're doing with my money.
One thing to say here that is independent of the discussion Bo you're raising is that one of the reasons why Russia has had such a past is because they were very autocratically led.
Sure, but I mean,
you could say, I mean,
I think it's a lot more to do with like geography, really. They're kind of trapped between two great worlds. Like, can be invaded from both sides, so you end up with that kind of culture.
Yeah. Certainly, it's a history of suffering. World War II alone
Yeah.
Tens of thousands of villages wiped off the map, millions of casualties. And of course, the war in the East, in World War II at least, raged across what is modern Ukraine.
Yeah.
There were like 2 or even 3 big battles of Kiev, giant pockets where they encircled each other and hundreds of thousands of guys aside were killed. So, the history of Ukraine, not even touching on the Holodomor, the history of Ukraine is one of terrible, terrible misery. Yeah.
There's no particular distinction between the types of history Ukraine and Russia have had.
Yeah.
That's the thing.
It's like when Tucker, again, had the temerity to actually speak to Putin. Putin took the narrative back to the 9th century.
Yeah.
And I actually did a video with Apostolic Majesty. I don't know if we can just click on just to show that. Yeah, I did over 2 hours, 2 hours 20 odd, talking to Apostolic Majesty, who is a fantastic mind, one of the best read people I've ever come across. And we talked for well over 2 hours, just about taking the narrative back, because this is what the Uni Party want you to think, is that history started in 2014 when there was that coup in Kiev.
And good things happened at that point. And it's all been good until right now, or until 2022, I think it was.
It's just mindless aggression from the Kremlin
against
poor little old Ukraine who didn't do nothing wrong. And Putin is a new Hitler type thing.
Yeah.
So if, let's see what Nigel actually said. If we can click on that Channel 4 News, quote, disgraceful comments link. There's one of the first ones, second one there. There you go. And just, or was that the one? Yeah. If we could just play this.
A stoic Vladimir Putin lays a wreath this morning in a ceremony to commemorate the Nazis' invasion of the Soviet Union.
Channel 4 News, globalist tunes.
It came just hours after Nigel Farage claimed it was the West who provoked Russia's invasion of Ukraine. A consequence, he said, of the EU and NATO expanding eastwards.
I stood up in the European Parliament in 2014 and I said, and I quote, "There will be a war in Ukraine. We've provoked this war. It's, of course it's his fault. He's used what
But we provoked the invasion of Ukraine.
Yes, and very interestingly, once again, 10 years ago when I predicted this, by the way, I'm the only person in British politics that predicted what would happen.
This isn't a new argument from Nigel Farage. Here he is in the European Parliament in 2014.
And the moral of the story is, if you poke the Russian bear with a stick, don't be surprised when he reacts.
I talked about it actually as a matter of social justice.
But by breakfast time today, it was Rishi Sunak being forced to react once again to headlines created by Reform. After meeting with members of London's nighttime economy, he wasn't holding back.
What he said was completely wrong and only plays...
Sorry. Meeting with members of London's nighttime economy.
During the day.
No idea what that means.
Yeah, probably not the most respectful of people. Anyway,
so you made up
Putin's hands. This is a man who deployed nerve agents on the streets of Britain, who's doing deals with countries like North Korea, and this kind of appeasement is dangerous for Britain's security, the security of our allies that rely on us, and only emboldens Putin further.
Hello. Keir Starmer wanted to talk about justice for the Windrush generation today, but also found himself wading into this row.
Farage's comments about Russia and Ukraine are disgraceful.
Are they?
I've always been clear that Putin bears responsibility, sole responsibility, for the Russian aggression in Ukraine. And I think...
Okay, sorry.
So...
Well, I was going to go through each one of their response after, if we just...
Oh, sorry, okay.
Who wants to stand to be a representative in our parliament should be really clear that whether it's Russian aggression on the battlefield or online, that we stand against that aggression. That's, standing behind Ukraine, but also standing up for our freedom.
Another eye-catching photo call for Ed Davey. He wanted to focus on environmental issues today, but joined in the chorus of condemnation.
Vladimir Putin and Russia embarked on an illegal invasion of Ukraine. They are killing hundreds of thousands of people, some innocent civilians, and it is absolutely appalling. And it's Putin and Russia who are to blame for this, no one else.
No one else.
And I strongly support the efforts that Britain has made to support the Ukrainians. I wish we'd done more, actually.
Okay, end it. You can finish that there. So I thought we'd go through, because so that's what's been in the news cycle for a bit.
Just to be clear, that really does display the Uniparty, the liberal consensus on the entire subject.
A chorus of condemnation.
Yeah. No, we all completely agree that we've never done anything wrong and Russia is entirely evil. It's like, oh, well, if it's that simple then, thank God, funnel more men and materiel to Ukraine so more people can just die in this war. And we don't need to think any further on the issue.
Yeah. Endless, the decision's been made for you at the State Department and the Pentagon. Just endless men and materiel.
Yeah, it's pathetic.
So I thought we'd go through what Sunak, Starmer and Ed Davey said there, at least briefly. So Sunak actually made probably the most salient points. And I'd like to reiterate here, I'm not pro-Putin or pro-Kremlin.
Yeah, no, we don't need to give that any... Okay, we don't need to dignify that.
Putin is an ex-FSB killer.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
He does assassinate people, including like journalists and stuff.
Yeah.
Okay, so... Sunak mentioned the Skripal affair or the nerve agent thing.
Yeah.
Well, okay, that is really bad. That's absolutely terrible. Yeah, I mean, Skripal was a sort of a complete traitor and double agent, and so in the Kremlin's mind, he needs to die.
Obama drone struck an American citizen without any congressional oversight.
Right. Yeah.
Or legal comeuppance.
We'll send the SAS to Gibraltar to kill people if we need to.
This is what states do.
Yeah. Israel will send someone to Norway or whatever to kill someone on the street if they need to. So they'll do it.
Okay.
They'll do it. Also, let's not forget Litvinenko. That wasn't nerve agent. That was actually polonium.
Yeah.
So Putin's not a good guy. Okay, we don't need to. But anyway, the idea of appeasement. It's like what's happening in eastern Ukraine isn't the same as like the Sudetenland or the Rhineland.
Yeah.
Or annexing Austria that Hitler did and things like that. It's just not the same thing. Starmer said that Putin bears sole responsibility. That's just simply wrong. It takes two to tango.
Yeah.
It's not like one morning he decided there's complete peace and harmony in Ukraine, eastern Ukraine. I think just because I'm a psycho, I'm going to invade it. That's just not what happened.
But also they weren't addressing the point because Farage said that it was Putin's fault, although he was provoked. No one addressed this. They all reacted as if he said something quite different, as if he said it's not his fault.
Yeah. Deliberately misunderstanding what he said.
Or as if he was justified in doing it, as if it's a good thing that he's done it.
And in a way, I mean, of course, it would be the West that would provoke Russia in such a case, because the EU and NATO and the US are trying to exert influence upon that part of the world. So
it's what Farage said there about poking the Russian bear. Don't expect it not to react. Of course, that's true. Of course, that's just like in the playground. If you keep poking someone, then they throw a punch at you. I mean, it is.
What a disgraceful thing to say.
Right. But I remember seeing a clip of Putin a long time ago talking about NATO. He said, "Look, if you treat me reasonably, if you stop trying to take the mickey out of us, we'll treat you reasonably, but you don't seem to be doing that. You're painting me into a corner here."
Well, the whole issue is that the Western, and I really mean that this is the liberal philosophy on the way that history works, doesn't recognize the legitimacy of non-liberal states. And so we are turning ourselves conveniently blind to the idea of spheres of influence. And this was well understood during, say, the Cold War, with the Cuban Missile Crisis and things like that. No, you can't just have Soviet missiles on America's doorstep because that is a security threat to the United States, and it was well recognized. For example, if Mexico was like, we want to join the Russian Federation, you think America would be like, oh, well, I mean, they voted for it. Well, they just voted for it, guys. They all decided no. Bollocks, right? Russia has a sphere of influence and Ukraine is directly in it, and it's a prisoner of geography in this regard. It's never going to not be in Russia's influence. And so the fact that we go, well, they just voted to join the EU, it's like, look, you can't pretend that there aren't competing poles here, like axes around which power revolves. That is the case. And it is the case that the Russians are going to look at this and go, well, this is encroaching literally up to our border. We have to respond in some way. That's what Farage is saying. It's going to look provocative to the Russians. Now, I'm not Russian. I don't care about Russia. I have no sympathies for Russia. It's just anyone with any kind of understanding of how states react to these things will know. I'm about 2/3 of the way through rereading the history of the Peloponnesian War by Thucydides. For no particular reason, I just love reading it. And it's becoming very, very stark that this is what is the case. I mean, this is why the Spartans declared war on the Athenians. The Athenians were amassing a great empire in Greece, and they were like, well, hang on a second, they're taking our allies. Our allies are feeling threatened by the expansion of the Athenians, and so it was the growth of Athenian power that led the Spartans to declare the war, as Thucydides puts it. And it's very much the same sort of thing here. It's the growth of NATO power and reach and influence that has caused Putin to think, right, we have to do something now. A red line has been crossed.
I have to also introduce something else in the equation here, because many times we hear about, how the West is very short-sighted and non-Western countries have a long-term planning on the level of their leadership. But you could say that in some cases, this is not necessarily always an argument against Western countries, because there's another argument that I've heard. I mean, I'm no geopolitical expert, but it says that, well, Putin had more than 20 years in power, and he had 2 decades to exercise good influence into the countries that are under the sphere of influence of Russia, and he didn't. And a lot of them want to join the EU. Now, obviously, some are going to say, no, they are planned. It's just the planned leadership and stuff. But at least when it comes to Ukraine, the Ukrainians, I know they hear Russia and they just go mad instantly, like bulls. But,
Yeah. So there is that idea of spheres of influence. It's a very sort of Cold War thing. That's what I think the State Department and the Pentagon are sort of still wrapped up in, this idea that the whole world should fall into spheres of influence and things. And
well, so it does, whether you like it or not.
Right, yeah. And so if you listen to the Tucker Putin interview or the Bodade Apostolic Majesty interview, you'll see that what we call Ukraine, or the area around Kiev, does go back centuries and centuries and centuries. They're sort of almost more Russian than Russian in a way. It's sort of the Kievan Rus and
Cossacks as well.
And it's extremely complicated. We talked about it for over 2 hours, and still it's sort of reasonably opaque. But the point is that of course Kiev comes under the influence of Moscow.
Yeah.
Sort of, there's no way around that. But Russia have been our sort of strategic enemies firmly since like the 18th century. There's the Great Game and all that sort of thing, and of course the Cold War.
Another way of looking at this is just reversing it. So what interest and claim does America have to Ukraine?
Right, yeah.
Why does NATO have any interest in Ukraine at all?
Well, no, so this is another part of my take, is that Ukraine is being used as just a playground for the bigger powers.
Sure.
Just a plaything where all sorts of espionage and shenanigans and skullduggery go down both sides, using it as just a way to try and attack each other, of course.
Yeah.
And the last thing that either of them seem to care about are the lives of Ukrainian people.
Well, I mean,
absolutely.
We're more than willing to give them as much money and material as it requires.
And scupper peace deals.
Yeah. And literally Boris Johnson just dove in front of the peace deal and prevented that from happening. But the thing that drives me crazy about this is what is the purpose of getting Ukraine in NATO? What is the purpose of it? Why do we want that? And the only answer seems to be extending the liberal hegemony. That seems to be the only answer.
To put pressure on the Kremlin,
Yeah. To continue the sort of manifest destiny of liberalism to conquer the entire world.
Because NATO is such a Cold War thing, the North Atlantic Treaty Organization, as a riposte to the Warsaw Pact.
Yeah.
That everyone will, if Stalin, in the first instance, was going to try and take over all of sort of West Germany and the rest of Western Europe, there needs to be some sort of grand coalition in place to push back against that immediately. NATO. So it's sort of left over. It's a Cold War remnant. That's how I see NATO.
Well, that's exactly right. That explains why it's such an ideologically driven bloc, right? So we are the Western liberal powers, and we have rendered the opponents to be illegitimate. We, of course, do this on a selective basis. We don't do it for Saudi Arabia or something like that. When it's convenient, we just render you totally illegitimate, and then we're completely justified in doing whatever we can against you. Whereas this is not like the old world view, which has been presented by Nigel Farage. Nigel Farage looks in terms of peoples, national managements, governments, empires, thinks states operating, and so you don't really. It's not really about passing judgment on a rival state. Right? It's a lot more of a value neutral assessment. Say, well, if you take these actions, then that state will undoubtedly take this action because it will be in their interest to do so. Whereas the liberal says, well, but what about gay rights in Ukraine? It's like, sorry, that's not the issue. That's not what we're talking about. That's an inappropriate moral judgment at this point. The question is the management of power between great nations, and that's the frame in which Nigel Farage is speaking, not the moral opprobrium of liberalism.
But I really don't think, though, that the US state wanted to exercise influence on Ukraine for gay rights.
No, well,
I think it's what you said before about if we are going to apply
I don't know.
the CDDs on the issue, it's not about gay rights, it's about increasing power.
Yeah, but that's a part of their power. That's how they express their power. They absolutely are concerned about gay rights in Ukraine. There are going to be people in the US State Department who will literally bring this up in meetings. Like it's about moral,
but I don't think
it's about moral legitimacy for action. But you are also right that there's going to be a huge amount of corruption. I mean, we know that the Americans are going to be deeply involved in various corrupt enterprises in Ukraine.
If I could just draw it back to Nigel and the news cycle in Britain. You called it a sort of a value-neutral thing from Nigel Farage. Yeah, absolutely. I'd characterise it more as just being honest about reality.
Well, yeah.
That seems to me what Nigel is doing. And that's exactly what they don't like. Because if you remember, Starmer basically said, anyone who stands in Parliament sort of must stand against this aggression.
Must we?
Yeah, must we?
Anyone who stands in Parliament must be in favour of World War III. For gay rights in Ukraine.
That they must
to make sure that there's no investigation into Biden's dealings in Ukraine. Right?
You shouldn't be allowed in Parliament unless you toe the State Department's line. And the State Department is the American version of the Foreign Office, basically. So that's sort of scary, absolutely scary. Ed Davey called it an illegal invasion. Well, I mean, we're just crazy now.
Unlike the legal invasion of Iraq that we
undertook. Exactly.
Invasions are generally illegal.
He seemed terribly upset that, that lots of people were getting killed. Didn't seem to care about Russian people getting killed.
But this
Russian soldiers' lives don't count for anything.
Look at the framing. It's an illegal invasion, as if there is some rule of law adjudicated by a neutral arbiter of the nations of the world that declares good invasions and bad invasions. And this is the problem that I have with just the Western liberal consensus on everything. Everything is presupposed. No, we never did anything wrong. We're always in the right. And our opponents are just insane, barbarous murderers. And therefore, we can just demonize them to our heart's content. And any amount of trying to have a rational look, a fair, value-neutral look at the situation renders you to be giving aid and comfort to the enemy. And it's like, no, that's ridiculous.
It's childish, isn't it?
It's childish.
It's very deliberately low resolution.
Yeah, but it's childish and wildly ideological.
But isn't there a question whether there are just wars and unjust wars?
I'm not saying there are not just wars and unjust wars. The problem is that's a valued question. And so you have to say, well, who holds the value? Because, I mean, Putin will definitely find that what he's doing to be a just war, even if I don't. Yeah. You know, it's so Ed Davies has to apply some sort of neutral, transcendent, liberal rule of law that just doesn't exist and pretend that, well, we're completely on the side of good, even though we've done things that Putin could rightly say, well, was it a legal invasion of Iraq? Was it? And we'll be like, well, I mean, by our laws, you know, but he might not agree. I'm sure Saddam Hussein didn't agree. You know, like it's a fiction that we're trying to live within that we assume everyone is somehow morally forced to agree with, which they're not.
Jack Straw did get a very ambiguously worded UN resolution to allow.
Oh well,
who
cares about UN resolutions?
The last thing Ed Davies said, which I wanted to pick up on, was he said it was a direct quote: "No one else is to blame." Like, wrong, Ed, wrong. That's just wrong. History didn't start in 2014. So I thought, well, very quickly, I was going to dunk on Nick Robinson at the BBC there, but I won't bother. Everyone knows sort of what he is. It was interesting to note that actually Richard Tice, a side note, Richard Tice and Nigel Farage seem to have very different views on it because Tice a few months ago was just sort of seemingly absolutely just unequivocally pro-Ukraine, sort of no nuance there whatsoever. And now Nigel is saying something very different. Anyway, that's interesting to know.
Well, just a quick thing here. You can be pro-Ukraine and still a realist about how things have come about. As in, you know, I mean, I'm an Englishman, so I always root for the underdog. You know, I don't have any particular sympathies for Russia. I imagine what the Ukrainians themselves are actually physically going through is hell on earth. You know, I mean, like I've seen the footage of drones killing Ukrainians and Russians, and I'm like, that is just the worst.
I'm not anti-Ukraine. I'm anti-Zelensky and anti the Ukrainian government. I'm not anti the Ukrainian people or your average Ukrainian conscript. Absolutely not.
So
not in a million years. That would be mad. That would be weird and mad.
And so, as you can see, he's bringing medical supplies from the UK. That's actually that's actually a good and noble thing to do. Yeah. So there's in that way you can be pro-Ukraine, but the Ukrainian state, which is deliberately refusing to negotiate with Russia because of the backing of the United States, that's the problem.
So I thought we could quickly, for anyone who's forgotten or is quite a few years ago now, isn't old enough to remember, sort of the run-up to it, how it happened, that it wasn't just pure mindless aggression from the Russians and that no one else is to blame other than it's literally just come out of the mind of Putin. I mean, how far do you go back? Sort of. So if we talk about maybe 1991, when the Soviet Union fell apart.
1027.
That's too short-sighted.
Right, yeah, even that.
Centuries back.
We should go back to the 9th century. Yeah, absolutely. But if you say when the Soviet Union fell apart in 1991 and Ukraine sort of becomes its own thing again, but by sort of 2004, 2005, sort of the politics of Ukraine, the Orange Revolution there, and there's the two victors, aren't there? Viktor Yushchenko, who's sort of the pro-European one, who got poisoned. They did try Putin tried to poison him to death, and it failed. And then there's the other
guy
Viktor
with a rough face because of the poisoning. Yeah, I know the guy. Yeah.
They tried to poison him, and he just about survived. And there's the Viktor Yanukovych. So anyway, there was a back and forth there.
It's like the two Spider-Mans pointing at each other, isn't it? Like, good God.
There was an actual sort of legit battle for the hearts and minds of Ukraine. And both sides, let's be perfectly honest, both sides, both the Kremlin and DC, had their fingers all over their intelligence and their special services and all sorts of things all over it. And there was a back and forth for years, between 2004, 2005, up to November 2013 into sort of January, February 2014, when things really kicked off. That whole period is a back and forth where it seems legitimately millions of people in Ukraine wanted to join Europe, be closer to Europe and cut ties with Russia, but also a big chunk of people, especially in the east of Ukraine, consider themselves more Russian than Ukrainian.
Yeah.
So a genuine battle for the hearts and minds of people.
Just to be clear, wasn't it Vladimir Lenin who created Ukraine as a political entity that we understand it now?
Right, yeah, so if you want to go back that far, Lenin made the political calculation that they should be given some autonomy, yeah.
Sure. But the fact that this was a conglomeration of ethnic Ukrainians and ethnic Russians, and not like clearly drawn borders, means that perhaps a revisitation of that settlement might be worth looking at, considering that seems to be the core of Putin's support in Ukraine are ethnic Russians. So
just to say, because time's ticking on, just very, very quickly to say, between about 2010 and 2014-15, there was a real back and forth between the two victors over who's going to be president, and some of them won legit elections, or some of the elections were considered to be fortified one way or the other.
Yeah, I'm sure they were free and fair.
And in the end, the pro-Russian victor won. But then the people sort of basically ousted him, whether with the connivance of the Americans.
Sure, they had nothing to do. Let's call up some of the left-wing journalists. Hello, do you think America would ever do something funny in Ukraine? No, I didn't think so.
There is a clip of John McCain in Kiev. Can we play that clip real quick? So the idea that history started when Putin invaded is obviously wrong. If you play this.
Good. Most famous dove.
So one of the biggest globalist shields of all time, John McCain. The late John McCain.
People of Ukraine, this is your moment. Народи український, це ваш момент. This is about you, no one else.
Is it?
Це про вас.
As an American politician in Ukraine.
This is about the future you want for your country. This is about the future you deserve.
Anyway, don't need to play anymore. You get the idea. You probably remember.
I know I keep butting in to extend the length of this, but they gave exactly the same sort of speeches in Afghanistan. And one thing that I guess Ukrainians should really think about is how long is America's attention really going to be on us? You know, like, again, apparently if Afghanistan is anything to go by, about 20 years. And then you're trapped as a prisoner of geography next to the Russians forever. Having a fair settlement would be better. I think.
Well, the State Department, the Pentagon, and the White House have all said it will be there as long as it takes.
Yeah, they said that in Afghanistan. And then after 20 years, that collapsed. They fled, and they left the Taliban with billions of dollars in weaponry.
You can see how Putin, if you are going to have a value neutral judgment, you can see how Putin sees that there's maybe some sort of coup in Ukraine, a pro-American coup, and they want to keep making noises about joining NATO. You can see how it's just a provocation.
Well, it looks like American imperialism to the Russian mind,
right?
Because they don't think of terms of rule of law and stuff like that. They think of terms in power politics. And if Americans seem to be pulling the strings in Ukraine, then they'll view that as just another maneuver in the great game.
So this is what Nigel's talking about: is that we provoked it, we the West.
Yeah.
There you go.
Yeah.
And of course, history didn't start with this.
Oh yeah,
it goes back and back and back and back.
I mean, like you just it's literally like anything like this. If you have a powerful nation who is interfering in what are the sort of satellites of another powerful nation, and their politicians were to go and speak there. I mean, like this is like Alcibiades being Argos. The Spartans are going like, "What are you doing in Argos, Alcibiades? That's right on our doorstep. It's nowhere near Athens. What are you doing here?" And this provokes the second half of the. Sorry, I'm not going to go on Thucydides rant.
So, I don't mind, but I'm sure the audience does.
But this is the point: is people are representatives of the place they've come from, whether you like it or not, and that's what's being perceived in the old world view of international relations.
So, just the idea that Putin is the sole aggressor, any dissent from that view is disgraceful.
Yeah,
it's just nonsense.
Well, it's a cult mentality,
and it doesn't make you a Putin apologist. It doesn't make you a pro-Kremlin partisan to say or think that.
No, it's childish.
It's just being reasonable. It's just looking at reality. And so the very last thing I'll say is that I did write an article about this pretty much bang on 2 years ago, where I basically said that. And in it I explicitly say, once again, Putin is not a good person. He's an FSB sort of cynical killer type. But yet I don't support Zelensky.
He's a czar by any other name.
Right, yeah.
What do you expect out of Russia?
Yeah. Okay, so Nigel did nothing wrong. He's actually just expressing a reasonable view.
A salient old world political analysis that is accurate. And if we were sensible and not liberal ideologues, we'd try and come to a fair settlement and arrangement with Russia on Ukraine.
Nigel is not in hock to the State Department and the Pentagon.
No.
Great.
Yeah. Okay. Oh, he must be in hock to Putin. No, I really don't think he is. I think he's I think he's a normal chap.
It's not our war, just like the Israeli-Palestinian conflict.
Yeah.
Britain it's got no dog in the fight between Russia and Ukraine.
Yeah.
We should not be involved in it.
And I just want peace. I don't want World War III. We've seen them putting out the adverts that now feature white guys. Oh, do they really? Your military recruiting adverts have white guys in. No, I'm not going to war for Ukraine and American imperialism.
Like, it's really sad that loads of Ukrainian civilians and soldiers are being killed.
Tragic.
But we don't care at all about how many Russians die. No, both. I don't want either side to be throwing lives away.
Yeah, the drone striking of just individual Russian soldiers fleeing through a field is awful to watch as well. But anyway. Hi folks, thanks for watching. You can watch the entire podcast, The Lotus Eaters, live at 1 p.m, only on lotuseaters.com. And while you're there, you could sign up for £5 a month if you want to support us, help us keep the lights on, because of course we're demonetized on YouTube. And you can watch Dan Tubbs' amazing Brokenomics series, where he breaks down everything economic and various other things beside. It's excellent stuff, and we appreciate all the support. Thanks very much.